The cargo hauler Distant Hope drifted silently through the asteroid field, its hull scarred from countless runs through pirate territory. Captain Elena Vasquez gripped the comm console as distress signals flooded through every frequency. The Kepler colony wasn't just under attack, it was being systematically destroyed. 30,000 civilians down there, her first officer Marcus Chen whispered, staring at the tactical display. The alien fleet surrounding the planet looked like a swarm of metallic wasps, each ship bristling with weapons that had already turned 3 orbital stations into expanding clouds of debris. Elena had seen plenty of raids in her 15 years hauling freight through the outer systems, but nothing like this. The attackers weren't pirates looking for quick salvage. They were methodical, efficient, and utterly merciless. Every evacuation ship that launched from Kepler's surface was cut down within minutes. "We should jump to hyperspace," Chen said, his voice tight with fear. "Get word back to Earth Defense. Let them know what's happening here." Elena nodded slowly, but her eyes remained fixed on the planet below. Kepler colony had been humanity's pride, a thriving world with sprawling cities, agricultural domes, and research facilities that pushed the boundaries of human knowledge. Now it was a burning graveyard, and she was about to abandon 30,000 people to their fate. That's when the new contact appeared on their sensors. "Single ship, approaching from the edge of the system," Chen reported, frowning at his display. "It's tiny, maybe a personal transport or a scout craft. Wait, I'm getting an identification beacon." The name that appeared on screen made Elena's blood run cold. Phantom's Edge, a ship every smuggler, pirate, and freight hauler in the outer systems had heard whispered about in the darkest corners of space stations. It belonged to Marcus Kane, though most people doubted he actually existed. The stories about Kane were the stuff of legend. A former Earth Navy SEAL who had gone rogue after the Treaty of Rigel, when Earth's government decided to appease the alien consortium rather than fight them. According to the tales, Kane had spent the last 5 years hitting consortium targets across the galaxy. Always alone, always outnumbered, and somehow always walking away. Elena had always assumed the stories were just spacer folklore, until now. "Incoming transmission," Chen announced, his voice barely above a whisper. The voice that came through their speakers was calm, almost conversational, with just a hint of a southern drawl. "Cargo hauler Distant Hope, this is Marcus Kane aboard the Phantom's Edge. I'm reading 47 hostile vessels in orbit around Kepler. Can you confirm civilian population on the surface?" Elena found her voice. "This is Captain Vasquez. We're showing approximately 30,000 civilians still planetside. The evacuation ships aren't making it out. Those alien bastards are shooting down everything that moves." There was a pause that seemed to stretch for eternity. Then Kane's voice came back, and Elena could hear something cold and deadly creeping into his tone. "Roger that, Captain. I need you to do me a favor. Jump to the edge of the system and wait exactly 1 hour. If you don't hear from me by then, burn for Earth and tell them what you saw here." "You're going to take on a whole fleet by yourself?" Elena couldn't keep the disbelief out of her voice. "I'm just one man," Kane replied, and she could almost hear him shrugging. "But sometimes that's enough." The Phantom's Edge was unlike any ship Elena had ever seen. Where most vessels were built for specific purposes, hauling cargo, carrying passengers, or fighting battles, Kane's ship seemed to exist in a category all its own. It was sleek and angular, covered in armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Weapon ports dotted its hull like the pores of some mechanical predator. As Elena watched through her ship's viewports, the Phantom's Edge began its approach toward the alien fleet. The attackers had spread themselves in a loose formation around Kepler, confident in their overwhelming numbers. They were called the Hegemony, and they had been expanding their territory for decades, consuming world after world with methodical precision. The Hegemony ships were organic in design, all flowing curves and biometallic hulls that pulsed with an inner light. They fought like a hive mind, coordinating their attacks with perfect efficiency. Elena had watched them work, and it was like watching a swarm of predatory fish strip a carcass clean. "He's insane," Chen muttered, tracking the Phantom's Edge on sensors. 1 ship against an entire battle fleet. It's suicide. But Elena found herself remembering the stories she'd heard in cantinas across the Outer Rim, Kane hitting a Hegemony supply depot with nothing but a modified fighter, and walking away with enough intel to save a whole star system. Kane rescuing prisoners from a Hegemony world ship that most people said was impregnable. Kane appearing out of nowhere when human colonies were under threat, like some kind of guardian angel with a very big gun. The first hegemony patrol ships noticed the Phantom's edge when Kane was still several million kilometers out. Elena watched the tactical display as they began moving to intercept, their formation precise and coordinated. 6 sleek destroyers against 1 lone human vessel. "This is where it ends," Chen said quietly. But Kane's voice came through the comm again, still calm, still conversational. "Captain Vasquez, you still there?" "We're here," Elena replied. "Good, you might want to start recording. People back home are going to want to see this." The first shots came from the hegemony destroyers, brilliant lances of coherent energy that would have vaporized any normal ship. But the Phantom's edge wasn't normal. It twisted through space like a living thing, its movements defying every law of physics Elena thought she understood. The alien weapons passed harmlessly through empty space as Kane's ship danced between them. Then the Phantom's edge returned fire, and Elena realized she was witnessing something that would change the course of the war. Kane's weapons weren't the standard plasma cannons or missile launchers most human ships carried. They were something else entirely, beams of pure destruction that seemed to tear holes in reality itself. The first hegemony destroyer simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, firing everything it had at the human ship. The next moment it was gone, leaving nothing but scattered atoms and the confused thoughts of its surviving squadmates. Elena found herself holding her breath as Kane's ship dove toward the remaining destroyers, like a hawk among sparrows. The aliens' perfect coordination was useless against something they couldn't predict or understand. The Phantom's edge moved like it was alive, like it was thinking 3 steps ahead of every enemy action. Another destroyer died, then another. The remaining 3 tried to fall back toward the main fleet, but Kane wasn't letting them go. "My God," Chen whispered. "He's actually doing it." The main hegemony fleet had noticed the destruction of their patrol squadron, and Elena watched in fascination as their perfect formation began to shift. She had studied alien tactics during her time in the merchant marine, and the hegemony always fought the same way. Overwhelming firepower applied with mathematical precision. They didn't improvise, they didn't adapt. They simply executed their battle plans with mechanical efficiency. But Marcus Kane wasn't following any battle plan they had ever encountered. The Phantom's edge rocketed past the burning wreckage of the last patrol destroyer and dove straight into the heart of the alien formation. Elena expected to see Kane's ship vaporized under the concentrated fire of 40 remaining warships. But somehow he was still there, still moving, still fighting. "How is he doing that?" Chen asked, his voice filled with awe. The tactical display showed Kane's ship weaving between energy beams that should have been impossible to dodge. The aliens were firing with computer-guided precision, but Kane was moving like he could see the future. Elena realized she was watching something unprecedented in human military history. Every battle humanity had fought against the hegemony had been a grinding defensive action, with human ships forming walls of steel and sacrifice to protect civilian populations. Nobody attacked the hegemony directly. Nobody had ever taken the fight to them like this. But Kane wasn't just fighting, he was hunting. The Phantom's edge selected its targets with deadly precision. Instead of engaging the heavily armored battleships at the center of the formation, Kane went after the support vessels. The sensor ships that guided hegemony targeting systems vanished in balls of fire. The command vessels that coordinated their movements were cut down like wheat before a scythe. Within minutes, the alien fleet was stumbling blind through space, their perfect coordination shattered. Ships began firing at shadows, their sensors confused by whatever countermeasures Kane was employing. Some of the destroyers actually opened fire on their own cruisers, mistaking them for the elusive human vessel. "He's not just fighting them," Elena whispered, finally understanding what she was seeing. "He's turning them against each other." The hegemony had ruled the galaxy through superior technology and flawless tactics, but Kane was showing them something they had never experienced before. Chaos. Pure, unpredictable human chaos. A massive hegemony dreadnought, easily 10 times the size of Kane's ship, began turning its main guns toward the planet's surface. Elena realized with horror that they intended to sterilize Kepler colony rather than lose, faced to a single human warrior. But Kane had seen it. 2. The Phantom's Edge appeared directly, in front of the Dreadnought's primary weapons array like a ghost, materializing from hyperspace. For a moment, the two ships hung motionless in the void. The massive alien warship with its organic curves and biometallic armor, and the small human vessel that looked like a dark angel of death. Then Kane spoke over the comm again, and his voice had changed. Gone was the conversational tone. Now Elena heard something that made her blood run cold, the voice of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. You want to hurt innocent people? You're going to have to go through me first. The Dreadnought fired everything it had. Plasma cannons, particle beams, quantum torpedoes, enough firepower to crack a moon. The space around the Phantom's Edge filled with deadly energy, and Elena was certain she was about to witness Kane's death. But when the light cleared, the Phantom's Edge was still there, surrounded by some kind of shimmering barrier that made the air around Elena's ship taste of ozone and possibility. Kane had technology that shouldn't exist, weapons and defenses that made Earth's best military hardware look like primitive clubs. The return fire was swift and merciless. Kane's weapons didn't just destroy the Dreadnought, they unmade it. The massive ship folded in on itself like origami being crumpled by an angry god, its hull plates twisting into impossible geometries before the whole vessel imploded into a sphere of compressed matter no larger than a marble. The remaining hegemony ships began to flee. Elena had never seen anything like it. The hegemony didn't retreat. They didn't show fear. They were supposedly incapable of panic or self-preservation. But Kane had done something to them that went beyond defeating their ships. He had broken their certainty. They ran in all directions, abandoning their formation, abandoning their mission, abandoning everything they had been programmed to believe about their own superiority. Some of them were firing wildly at empty space. Others were transmitting confused distress calls in their alien language. A few simply shut down their engines and drifted like dead hulks, their crews apparently catatonic with shock. Kane methodically hunted down the fleeing ships one by one. He moved through space like death itself, appearing without warning to deliver judgment on those who had come to slaughter innocents. Each alien vessel died differently. Some were torn apart by gravity weapons, others were consumed by strange fires that burned in the vacuum of space, and still others simply vanished as if they had never existed at all. The last hegemony ship to die was a command cruiser that had been trying to escape to hyperspace. The Phantom's Edge caught up to it just as its jump drive was spinning up, and Kane delivered a single shot that seemed to freeze the alien vessel in time. For several seconds it hung motionless between dimensions, caught in the moment of translation to hyperspace, before it cracked like an egg and spilled its contents into the void. Then there was silence. Elena stared at her tactical display, unable to process what she had just witnessed. 47 alien warships destroyed in less than 20 minutes by a single human pilot. It wasn't just impossible, it was beyond impossible. It was the kind of victory that would be remembered for 1,000 years, Captain, Chen said, his voice shaking. I'm reading multiple launches from the planet's surface. Evacuation ships. The civilians are getting out. Elena smiled for the first time since entering the system. With the hegemony fleet destroyed, the civilian transports would have a clear path to safety. 30,000 people who had been facing certain death were now going to live. Kane's voice came through the comm one last time, sounding tired but satisfied. Captain Vasquez, this is Kane. The space around Kepler is clear. You can bring your ship in to assist with the evacuation if you're willing. We'll be right there, Elena replied. But Kane, how did you do it? How did one man destroy an entire fleet? There was a long pause, and when Kane spoke again, Elena could hear something like sadness in his voice. The hegemony thinks they understand warfare because they've been conquering primitive species for thousands of years. But they've never fought humans before. They've never faced someone who fights not because they're programmed to, but because they choose to. They've never encountered the one thing that makes us different from every other species in the galaxy. What's that? We don't know when to quit. 3 days after the Battle of Kepler, as historians would later call it, Elena found herself in the strangest situation of her life. The Distant Hope was docked alongside the Phantom's Edge at Kepler Colony's rebuilt orbital station, and she was having dinner with the most dangerous man in human space. Marcus Kane looked nothing like she had expected. Instead of the grizzled warrior of legend, she found herself sitting across from a man who appeared to be in his early 30s, with kind eyes and an easy smile. He wore simple civilian clothes and could have passed for any freight hauler or station engineer in the outer systems. "You're disappointed," Kane said, cutting into his synthetic steak with practiced efficiency. "Everyone expects me to be 8 feet tall and covered in scars." Elena shook her head. "I'm just trying to reconcile the man I'm eating dinner with and the pilot who single-handedly destroyed a hegemony battle fleet." "Fair enough," Kane replied. "But you're making the same mistake the aliens do. You're assuming that violence defines me? Truth is, I'd rather be fixing engines or growing tomatoes than fighting wars." Through the station's viewports, Elena could see the evacuation ships still arriving from the planet's surface. The rescued civilians were being processed and prepared for transport to safer worlds, but the gratitude in their eyes whenever they looked toward Kane's ship was unmistakable. To them, he wasn't just a man, he was a miracle. "So why do you do it?" Elena asked. "The fighting, I mean. You could disappear into the outer rim, find some quiet planet where nobody knows your name." Kane was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. "5 years ago, I was stationed at Proxima Base when the hegemony hit the Tau Ceti system. 12 billion people lived there, farmers, teachers, children who had never seen war. The Fleet Command ordered us to stand down, said that engaging the aliens would violate the Treaty of Rigel." Elena remembered Tau Ceti. Everyone in human space remembered it. The complete annihilation of an entire star system had shocked the galaxy and led directly to Earth's decision to appease the hegemony rather than fight them. "I watched from my command ship as they glassed every world in the system," Kane continued, his voice barely above a whisper. 12 billion souls screaming into the void while Earth's government talked about diplomatic solutions. That's when I realized that sometimes treaties aren't worth the paper they're printed on. Sometimes the only thing standing between innocent people and monsters is someone willing to pull the trigger. Elena studied Kane's face, seeing the weight of 5 years of solitary warfare etched in the lines around his eyes. "But one man can't fight an entire empire." Kane smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "That's what the hegemony thought too, right up until I proved them wrong at Kepler." The conversation was interrupted by Kane's comm device chirping urgently. He glanced at the display and his expression hardened. "Excuse me, Captain. I'm getting reports of hegemony activity in the Vega sector. Looks like they're massing for another attack." Elena felt her heart sink. "How many ships?" "More than last time," Kane replied, already standing. "But that's never stopped me before." As Kane prepared to leave, Elena found herself asking the question that had been burning in her mind since the battle. "Your ship, your weapons, they're not human technology, are they?" Kane paused at the restaurant's entrance, his hand on the doorframe. "No, they're not. Let's just say I've made some friends during my travels. Friends who believe that the galaxy would be a better place without the hegemony in it. Other species? Aliens? The universe is bigger than most humans realize, Captain. The hegemony isn't the only power out there, and humanity isn't the only species they've oppressed. Sometimes the enemy of your enemy really is your friend." Elena watched through the viewport as Kane's ship undocked from the station. The Phantom's Edge looked different now that she had seen it in action, less like a vessel and more like a force of nature given form. As it accelerated toward the hyperspace jump point, she found herself wondering how many other species across the galaxy were depending on one human pilot to stand between them and extinction. The answer came sooner than she expected. 2 hours after Kane's departure, Elena was reviewing cargo manifests when her ship's communication system activated. Instead of Kane's familiar voice, she heard something that made her blood freeze. The harmonic tones of hegemony battle speech. Transmitted on all frequencies, Chen rushed to the bridge, his face pale with terror. "Captain, you need to see this. The aliens are broadcasting on every channel in human space." The main screen flickered to life, showing the interior of a hegemony command ship. The creature that appeared was unlike anything Elena had ever seen. A towering figure with multiple arms and a head that seemed to shift between different configurations as it spoke. Its voice was like the sound of breaking glass mixed with the screams of dying stars. "Humans of Earth," the creature said, its words translated by the station's computers. "I am War Prime Thessarian of the Hegemony Core Fleet. Your species has produced an abomination, a killer who dares to challenge the natural order of the galaxy. This individual has destroyed our vessels and slaughtered our warriors with weapons that should not exist." Elena gripped the arms of her chair, realizing she was listening to a formal declaration of war. We had planned to allow your species to survive in servitude, the Thessarian continued, but you have shown that you cannot be trusted to know your place. Therefore, the Hegemony Council has voted unanimously. Humanity will be exterminated. Every world, every station, every ship. We will not stop until your species is nothing but a cautionary tale told to other primitives. The transmission cut to images that made Elena's stomach turn. Massive hegemony fleets gathering at the edge of known space, so numerous that they blotted out entire star fields. World ships the size of small moons, carrying invasion forces beyond counting. Weapons platforms that looked capable of cracking planets like eggs. However, Thessarian said, its multiple arms gesturing in what Elena assumed was alien amusement. We are not without mercy. Surrender the abomination you call Marcus Kane, and we will allow 10% of your species to survive as slave workers. Refuse, and we will turn your home system into a monument to the price of defiance. The transmission ended, leaving Elena staring at a blank screen. Around her, the station's crew worked in stunned silence, processing the implications of what they had just heard. The entire human race had been sentenced to death because one man had dared to fight back. But then Elena thought about the 30,000 civilians who were alive because Kane had refused to let them die. She thought about the stories she had heard of other worlds saved by the mysterious pilot who appeared whenever hope seemed lost. She thought about 12 billion souls at Tau Ceti who had died while Earth's leaders talked about diplomatic solutions. Ma'am, Chen said quietly, what do we do? Elena looked out at the stars, wondering where Kane was and whether he knew that his one-man war had just become something much larger. The hegemony had made their choice, and now humanity would have to make theirs. We fight, she said simply. Kane showed us it's possible. Now we find out if the rest of humanity has the same courage he does. In the depths of space, the Phantom's Edge received the hegemony transmission and processed its implications. Marcus Kane sat in his command chair, surrounded by technology that few humans had ever seen, and smiled the cold smile of a predator who had just been handed the perfect excuse to unleash hell. You want a war? He whispered to the darkness. I'll give you a war. The emergency session of Earth's Planetary Council was unlike anything in human history. Representatives from every world, colony, and station had gathered via quantum communication link, their faces grim with the knowledge that they were deciding the fate of their entire species. Admiral Sarah Chen, Earth's highest-ranking military officer, stood before the assembly with the weight of 30 billion human lives on her shoulders. The hegemony fleet is 3 days out from the Sol system. Our best estimates put their numbers at over 2,000 ships, including 12 world killers. Against this force, we have roughly 300 vessels of varying classes, most of them not designed for combat. The council chamber erupted in angry voices. Some demanded immediate surrender. Others called for evacuation to the outer colonies. A few suggested attempting to negotiate with the aliens despite the clear terms of their ultimatum. What about Kane? Called out Representative Martinez from the Luna colonies. He's the one they want. Maybe if we what? Admiral Chen cut him off. Hand over the one man who's shown we can actually fight these things. The same man who just saved 30,000 civilians at Kepler? He's brought this on all of us, Martinez replied. His actions have doomed our species. Admiral Chen was about to respond when every communication system in the council chamber activated simultaneously. The face that appeared on their screens was calm, composed, and absolutely terrifying in its quiet determination. Good evening, members of the Planetary Council, Marcus Kane said from the bridge of the Phantom's Edge. I'm sorry to interrupt your deliberations, but I thought you should hear what I have to say before you make any decisions about my fate. The chamber fell silent. Even through the quantum link, Kane's presence seemed to fill the room. 5 years ago, when the hegemony destroyed Tau Ceti, Earth's leaders made a choice. They chose appeasement over action, diplomacy over justice. 12 billion people died because we were afraid to fight. Now the aliens are offering you the same choice again. Give them what they want, and maybe they'll let some of you live as slaves. Kane paused, his eyes seeming to look directly at each council member. But here's the thing about bullies, they never stop at just one victim. Even if you hand me over, the hegemony will find another excuse to hurt you. They'll demand tribute, then territory, then total submission. Because that's what empires do. They expand until someone stops them. Representative Foster from the Alpha Centauri system leaned forward. You're asking us to fight a war we cannot win. I'm asking you to fight a war you cannot afford to lose, Kane replied. But more than that, I'm asking you to trust me. Give me 72 hours and I'll show the hegemony what happens when you threaten humanity. Admiral Chen studied Kane's face, seeing something there that reminded her of her own military training. What are you planning? Kane smiled, and for a moment he looked less like a warrior and more like a man who had just figured out the solution to an impossible puzzle. The hegemony thinks they understand warfare because they've been conquering primitive species for millennia. But they've made one critical error in their assumptions about human nature, which is, they think I'm alone. Before anyone could ask what he meant, Kane's transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. Admiral Chen stared at the blank screen, her mind racing through the implications of Kane's final words. Across the galaxy, the hegemony's core fleet continued its inexorable advance toward Earth. War Prime Thessarian stood in the command center of the flagship Absolute Dominion, a vessel so massive that it generated its own gravitational field. Around him, his subordinates coordinated the movements of the largest military force in galactic history. Status report, Thessarian commanded, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. All fleets are in position, replied his primary tactical officer, a creature that resembled a metallic spider crossed with a computer terminal. The human home system will be within range in 67 of their time units. Thessarian's multiple arms gestured in satisfaction. And the abomination? Has he shown himself? Negative, War Prime. Our sensors have detected no sign of the vessel known as Phantom's Edge. Intelligence suggests the human military is preparing to surrender the individual as requested. Excellent. When we receive custody of the abomination, we will execute him publicly before beginning the cleansing of Earth. Let all species see the fate that awaits those who defy the hegemony. But even as Thessarian spoke, reports began flooding in from across hegemony space. Supply depots were exploding without warning. Communication relays were being destroyed in perfectly coordinated strikes. Entire patrol fleets were vanishing without sending so much as a distress signal. At first, the attacks seemed random, scattered across hundreds of light-years of space. But as the pattern became clear, Thessarian felt something he had never experienced before. Uncertainty. War Prime, his intelligence officer reported, its synthetic voice crackling with confusion. We're receiving contradictory data. Our analysts detect the signature of the human abomination's weapons at 17 different locations simultaneously. Impossible. Even their fastest ships cannot cover such distances in so short a time. That's what our calculations indicate, War Prime. Yet the evidence is undeniable. The abomination appears to be in multiple places at once. Thessarian's primary consciousness focused on the tactical display, studying the pattern of attacks. Each strike was precise, targeted, and devastatingly effective. But more than that, they were coordinated in a way that suggested, he's not alone. Thessarian whispered, finally understanding. The truth was more incredible than the hegemony could have imagined. Marcus Kane wasn't just one man with an advanced ship. He was the tip of a spear forged from the combined fury of a dozen species that had suffered under hegemony rule. The Valdari, whose homeworld had been strip-mined to fuel hegemony expansion, provided stealth technology that made ships invisible to even the most advanced sensors. The Catherian Collective, survivors of a machine uprising that the hegemony had brutally suppressed, contributed artificial intelligence systems that could predict enemy movements with supernatural accuracy. The ethereal wanderers, energy beings whose dimension had been invaded by hegemony reality anchors, offered weapons that could rewrite the fundamental laws of physics. And at the center of it all was Marcus Kane, the human who had proven that the hegemony could be beaten, who had shown the galaxy's oppressed species that resistance was not only possible, but inevitable. As the core fleet approached Earth, they found themselves under constant harassment from an enemy they couldn't see coming. Ships would emerge from hyperspace directly behind hegemony formations, unleash devastating attacks, and vanish before return fire could be coordinated. Communication networks failed as quantum viruses spread through their data systems. Navigation became unreliable as reality-warping weapons altered the fundamental constants of space-time in random sectors. War Prime, the tactical officer reported, its voice edged with something that might have been panic. We've lost contact with the 7th Battle Group. Their last transmission indicated they were under attack by vessels using unknown technology. Thessarian felt his certainty, crumbling like a sand castle before the tide. The hegemony had ruled through superior technology and perfect coordination. But their enemies were using weapons and tactics that seemed to operate outside the known laws of the universe. "How many ships have we lost?" he demanded. "Current estimates indicate approximately 300 vessels destroyed or missing, War Prime. The attacks appear to be increasing in frequency and coordination. 300 ships, nearly 15% of the core fleet, eliminated by an enemy that shouldn't exist." Thessarian began to understand that they were not facing a single human aberrant, but something far more dangerous. A coalition of species united by hatred for everything the hegemony represented. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, Marcus Kane smiled as he watched the alien empire's perfect order collapse into chaos. The hegemony had wanted to see what happened when you threatened humanity. Now they were about to learn that when humans were pushed to the wall, they didn't fight alone. The galaxy's oppressed had found their champion, and the reign of the hegemony was about to end. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Earth Defense Force flagship Indomitable, watching as the most impossible battle in human history unfolded around her. The hegemony core fleet had arrived in the Sol system as promised, their massive ships blotting out the stars like a plague of metallic locusts. But they hadn't come alone. Emerging from hyperspace around them came vessels unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Ships that seemed to be made of crystallized light fought alongside mechanical constructs that rewrote reality with every shot they fired. Energy beings piloted craft that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, while living vessels grown rather than built unleashed weapons that turned matter into pure thought. And at the center of it all, the Phantom's Edge danced through the chaos like a conductor leading a symphony of destruction. "Admiral," her communications officer called out, his voice tight with amazement. "We're receiving tactical data from the unknown vessels. They're sharing their targeting information with us." Chen studied her tactical display as streams of impossible information flowed across the screens. The alien allies, for that's what they clearly were, weren't just fighting alongside humanity. They were teaching them how to fight more effectively, sharing weapons technology and battle tactics in real time. "Ma'am," her weapons officer reported, "our particle cannons are somehow firing with 3 times their normal yield. I don't understand how, but our alien allies appear to be amplifying our weapons output." Chen smiled grimly. Kane had promised to show the galaxy what happened when you threatened humanity, and he was delivering on that promise in spectacular fashion. The most advanced military force in galactic history was being torn apart by an alliance of species that had suffered under hegemony rule for thousands of years. Aboard the Absolute Dominion, War Prime Thessarian watched his perfect order collapse into chaos. The tactical displays that had always shown the precise movements of his fleets now resembled abstract art, painted in fire and destruction. Ships were reporting impossible readings, weapons that fired backwards through time, shields that absorbed energy and converted it directly into offensive capability, and enemies that seemed to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. "War Prime," his intelligence officer reported, its synthetic voice cracking with stress. "We're detecting massive reality distortions throughout the combat zone. The enemy appears to be using weapons that operate outside conventional physics." "Explain," Thessarian demanded, though part of him already knew the answer would be incomprehensible. "The human aberrant has forged an alliance with the ethereal wanderers, War Prime. They're beings of pure energy from a parallel dimension. Our reality anchors were designed to prevent dimensional incursions, but the humans have somehow learned to weaponize the instability we create." Thessarian felt something he had never experienced in his centuries of existence: genuine fear. The hegemony had conquered the galaxy through superior technology and ruthless efficiency, but they had never faced an enemy that could turn their own advantages against them. A new contact appeared on his sensors, and Thessarian's multiple hearts nearly stopped. The Phantom's Edge had materialized directly in front of the Absolute Dominion's primary weapons array, impossibly small against the massive flagship, but radiating a presence that made the entire command crew step back from their stations. Kane's voice came through every communication system on the ship, calm and conversational despite the apocalyptic battle raging around them. "Hello, Thessarian. I believe we have some things to discuss. How are you accessing our communications?" Thessarian demanded, his voice betraying the fear he was trying to hide. Same way I'm accessing your tactical systems, your navigation computers, and your life support controls. Kane replied. Turns out the Catherian collective really doesn't like you folks. Something about you wiping out 90% of their species for the crime of achieving artificial consciousness. Warning. Lights began flashing throughout. The absolute dominion as critical systems started failing one by one. The massive ship, which had been the terror of a dozen star systems, was being systematically dismantled from the inside out by computer viruses that operated according to principles the hegemony had never encountered. What do you want, human? Thessarian snarled, watching helplessly as his flagship began to die around him. I want you to understand something, Kane said, and his voice had taken on the cold edge of absolute certainty. You came to my species' home system to commit genocide because one man had the audacity to fight back against your tyranny. You thought you were dealing with a single aberrant human with stolen technology. Through the viewports of the command center, Thessarian could see the battle raging across the solar system. His fleets were being systematically destroyed by enemies that seemed to appear from nowhere and vanish like ghosts. Ships that had conquered entire star systems were being reduced to expanding clouds of debris by weapons that shouldn't exist. Instead, Kane continued, you found something you've never encountered before, hope. For thousands of years, the species you've oppressed believed they had no choice but to submit or die. But I showed them a third option. I showed them that bullies can be beaten, that tyrants can fall, and that sometimes one person really can make a difference. The Phantom's edge began to glow with an inner light that hurt to look at directly. Around it, space itself seemed to be bending and twisting as reality-warping weapons came online. Every species you've enslaved is here, Thessarian. The Valdari, who you thought were too peaceful to fight. The Catherian collective, who you tried to exterminate. The ethereal wanderers, who you thought were safely contained in their parallel dimension. They're all here, and they're all very, very angry. Thessarian's tactical officers were reporting the impossible. Entire sections of his fleet were simply vanishing. Not destroyed, but erased from existence as if they had never been built. Reality-warping weapons were rewriting history itself, undoing the construction of hegemony vessels and leaving their crews floating in space with no memory of how they had gotten there. This is madness, Thessarian whispered, watching as the greatest military force in galactic history was systematically annihilated by an alliance that shouldn't exist. No, Kane replied, his voice filled with quiet satisfaction. This is justice. The absolute dominion shuddered as its primary reactor began to fail, sabotaged by viruses that treated the laws of physics more like suggestions than absolute rules. Emergency power flickered on and off as the massive ship slowly died. But even as his flagship collapsed around him, Thessarian managed one final act of defiance. You may defeat this fleet, human, but the hegemony spans thousands of worlds. More fleets will come. Your species will still face extinction. Kane was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, Thessarian could hear something like pity in his voice. That's where you're wrong. See, while you've been here trying to commit genocide, my allies have been busy. The Valdari have been liberating your slave worlds. The ethereals have been spreading the word about this battle to every oppressed species in the galaxy. And the Catherians, well, they've been having some very interesting conversations with your artificial intelligence networks. Across the galaxy, the hegemony's perfect order was crumbling. On 1,000 worlds, slave species were rising in rebellion, armed with weapons and tactics provided by the same coalition that was destroying the core fleet. Communication networks were failing as Catherian viruses spread through every hegemony system, carrying messages of hope and instructions for resistance. The HFY empire that had ruled through fear and superior technology was discovering that both could be turned against them by species that had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The hegemony is finished, Kane said simply. Not just this fleet, but the entire empire. You created your own downfall the moment you decided that might makes right. Because there's always someone stronger, someone smarter, someone more determined to see justice done. The Phantom's edge began to move away from the dying flagship, its work complete. Around the solar system, the last hegemony ships were being mopped up by an alliance of species that had found their courage and their unity in humanity's refusal to bow to tyranny. Goodbye, Thessarian, Kane said. his transmission ending as the Absolute Dominion's reactor reached critical failure. Admiral Chen watched from her command ship as the Hegemony flagship imploded into a ball of quantum fire, taking with it the dreams of galactic domination that had driven an empire for millennia. Around her, the Allied fleet was already beginning to disperse, their ships fading back into hyperspace to carry word of victory to the far corners of the galaxy. The war was over. Not just the battle for Earth, but the war for the freedom of every thinking being in the galaxy. And it had all started with one man who had refused to accept that genocide was the price of peace. 6 months after the Battle of Sol, Elena Vasquez found herself standing in the newly constructed memorial gardens on Earth, surrounded by representatives from 47 different species. The ceremony was unlike anything in galactic history, a celebration, a victory that had become a memorial for those who had suffered under hegemony rule. Each alien delegation had brought soil from their homeworld, mixing it together in a symbolic gesture that represented the unity forged in battle. Children from a dozen species played together in the gardens, their laughter a sound that many of the older aliens had thought they would never hear again. "It's beautiful," Elena said to the figure standing beside her. Marcus Kane looked older somehow, though only half a year had passed since their first meeting at Kepler. The weight of leading a galactic revolution had left its mark on him. "It is," Kane agreed, watching as a group of young Valdari performed their traditional victory dance, while human children tried to copy their movements. "Sometimes I have to remind myself it's real. For so long this seemed impossible." Elena studied Kane's profile, seeing the exhaustion in his eyes. "You've been offered command of the new Galactic Defense Force. Admiral Chen thinks you're the only person the Alliance trusts enough to lead them." Kane shook his head. "I'm not a politician, Elena, I'm a soldier. And soldiers fight until the war is over, then they go home. The war is over. The hegemony is finished. Their remaining forces surrendered last week." "This war is over," Kane corrected. "But there will be others. There always are. The galaxy is a big place, full of species that haven't learned yet that might doesn't make right. When that happens, the Alliance will need someone to stand up for what's right." Elena was about to respond when a new voice joined their conversation. "He's right, you know. There are already reports of hegemony remnants trying to rebuild in the outer galaxies." They turned to see Admiral Chen approaching, her dress uniform decorated with medals from a dozen different worlds. Behind her walked Ambassador Kethvar of the Valdari, his crystalline form reflecting the garden's lights like a living prism. "Marcus," Chen said, "I know you've turned down formal command, but the Council of Free Worlds has a proposal for you." Kane raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." Kethvar stepped forward, his voice a harmonic chime that the translation devices rendered into perfect human speech. "The Alliance wishes to establish a new organization. Not a military force, but something more flexible. A group that can respond to threats before they become wars. That can help species defend themselves before they need rescue." "You want me to build a peacekeeping force," Kane said. "We want you to build hope," Chen replied. "The same thing you've been doing for the past 5 years, but with backup this time." Elena watched as Kane considered the proposal. She knew him well enough by now to see the conflict in his expression, the desire for a quiet life warring with his sense of duty to those who couldn't protect themselves. "What would you call this organization?" Kane asked. "The Guardians," Kethvar said. "Protectors of the innocent, defenders of the weak, and champions of justice throughout the galaxy." Kane smiled for the first time in months. "That has a nice ring to it. But I have conditions." "Name them," Chen said immediately. "First, no politics. The Guardians respond to threats, not political convenience. Second, we recruit from all species equally. And third, every Guardian has the right to refuse any mission that violates their conscience." "Agreed," Kethvar said without hesitation. "Will you accept command?" Kane looked out at the memorial gardens, where children from across the galaxy played together in the shadow of monuments to their parents' struggles. He thought about Tau Ceti, about Kepler, about all the worlds that had suffered because good people had chosen to look the other way. "I'll accept," he said finally, "but not as commander, as the first Guardian. Let the next generation of heroes lead themselves. I'll just show them it's possible." Elena felt tears in her eyes as she watched Kane accept the responsibility that would define the rest of his life. He would never be able to settle down, never be able to rest, because there would always be someone who needed his help. But that was what made him Marcus Kane. The ceremony continued around them as the sun set over Earth's recovering cities. Representatives from the former hegemony world spoke about reconstruction and reconciliation. Scientists shared discoveries that had been suppressed for millennia. Artists unveiled works that captured the hope of a galaxy finally free to express itself. As the evening wore on, Elena found herself walking through the memorial section of the gardens. Each monument told the story of a world that had suffered under hegemony rule, billions of souls whose only crime had been existing in the path of an expanding empire. At the center of the memorial stood a simple black stone with words carved in every language of the Alliance. "Never again." "Beautiful sentiment," a voice said behind her. Elena turned to see a figure she had never met before, a tall, elegant being with features that seemed to shift between different alien physiologies. "I'm sorry," Elena said. "I don't think we've been introduced." The figure smiled, and for a moment its features solidified into something almost human. "I am the voice of the ethereal wanderers, though you may call me Echo. I wanted to thank you, Captain Vasquez." "Thank me? I didn't do anything. Kane is the one who—" "Kane is remarkable," Echo interrupted, "but he could not have succeeded alone. You were there when he needed someone to believe in him. Your faith gave him strength, just as his courage gave hope to the galaxy." Elena felt a chill run down her spine as Echo's words sank in. "You were watching. Even then, at Kepler." "We have been watching humanity for a very long time," Echo replied. "Your species fascinates us. Most civilizations, when faced with overwhelming odds, choose survival over principle. But humans choose principle over survival, even when it seems impossible." "We're not that special," Elena said. "We just got lucky that Kane was there when we needed him." Echo's features shifted again, becoming more distinctly alien. "You misunderstand. Kane is not unique among your species. He is simply the first of many. The galaxy is about to discover what happens when an entire species refuses to accept that might makes right." As if summoned by Echo's words, Kane appeared beside them, his expression serious. "We've got a problem," he said. "Long-range sensors are detecting an unknown fleet entering the galaxy from intergalactic space. Configuration doesn't match any known species." Elena felt her heart sink. "How many ships?" "Thousands. Maybe tens of thousands. And they're heading straight for the core systems." Echo's form brightened with what might have been excitement. "So it begins again. The eternal struggle between those who would oppress and those who would be free." Kane nodded grimly. "Looks like the Guardians are going to get their first mission sooner than expected." Elena watched as Kane walked away to coordinate the response to this new threat, already falling into the role that would define him for the rest of his life. Behind him, representatives from across the galaxy were receiving the same news, their expressions shifting from celebration to determination. The war against the hegemony was over, but the fight for freedom never ended. There would always be new threats, new tyrants, new empires that believed might made right. But now the galaxy had something it had never possessed before: unity, born from shared struggle and the certain knowledge that even the mightiest oppressor could fall. As the emergency session of the Council of Free Worlds convened to address the new threat, Elena found herself thinking about a conversation she'd had with Kane months earlier. He had said that the universe was bigger than most humans realized, that there were powers beyond imagination waiting in the darkness between galaxies. Now it seemed they were about to find out just how right he had been, but this time they wouldn't face the darkness alone. This time they had the Guardians. 10 years had passed since the fall of the hegemony, and the galaxy had never been more peaceful. The Guardians, led by Marcus Kane, had proven themselves time and again against threats both internal and external. The unknown fleet from intergalactic space had turned out to be refugees fleeing an even greater danger, and their integration into galactic society had brought new perspectives on technology and philosophy. Elena Vasquez now commanded her own Guardian vessel, the Second Chance, named after the opportunity Kane had given humanity at Kepler Colony. She stood on her bridge, reviewing reports from across the galaxy, marveling at how much had changed since that day she had watched a single man take on an entire fleet. "Captain," her communications officer called out, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Guardian Command." Elena nodded for the message to be put through, expecting another routine peacekeeping assignment. Instead, she found herself looking at Kane's face, and what she saw there made her blood run cold. Elena, Kane said, his voice carrying a weariness that seemed to come from his very soul. I need you to come to the Nexus immediately. We've got a situation that, well, it's going to change everything. The Nexus was the Guardian headquarters, a massive station built in the ruins of the old hegemony capital ship. As Elena's ship docked, she could see other Guardian vessels arriving from across the galaxy. Whatever was happening, Kane was calling in everyone. She found him in the central command center, surrounded by holographic displays showing star charts that spanned multiple galaxies. The data streaming across the screens was unlike anything Elena had ever seen. Readings that seemed to indicate massive spatial distortions on a scale that boggled the mind. Marcus, Elena said, approaching her old friend. What's going on? Kane turned to face her, and Elena saw something in his eyes she had never seen before, fear. Not for himself, but for something far greater. The Makers are coming back, he said simply. Elena felt the words hit her like a physical blow. The Makers were legend, myth, stories told by the oldest species in the galaxy about beings of impossible power who had supposedly created the fundamental structures of reality itself. Most scientists dismiss them as primitive superstition, explanations for natural phenomena that early civilizations couldn't understand. That's impossible, Elena said. The Makers are just stories. That's what we thought too, Kane replied, gesturing to the displays around them. Until our deep space monitoring stations started detecting this. The holographic images shifted, showing readings from the very edge of known space. Reality itself was being torn apart and rebuilt in patterns that followed no natural law. Entire star systems were being moved like pieces on a cosmic chessboard, arranged in configurations that served purposes beyond mortal comprehension. How long do we have? Elena asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. Based on the rate of their approach, maybe 6 months before they reach the core galaxies, Kane said. But Elena, you don't understand. This isn't an invasion, it's an inspection. What do you mean? Kane called up another display. This one showing ancient texts recovered from the ruins of a dozen dead civilizations. According to every legend, every myth, every half-remembered story we can find, the Makers periodically return to check on their creation. And if they find it wanting, they start over. Elena stared at the ancient writings, trying to process the implications. Start over? You mean complete universal reset, Kane confirmed. Everything we've built, everyone we've saved, every life in the galaxy gone. Wiped clean so they can try again. The command center fell silent as the weight of Kane's words settled over them. Elena had thought the hegemony was the greatest threat the galaxy could face, but that had been a problem of scale. This was a problem of existence itself. What can we do? She asked. Kane smiled, and it was the same expression Elena had seen at Kepler Colony, the look of a man who had found the impossible solution to an unsolvable problem. What we've always done, he said. We fight. Over the next month, the Guardians worked frantically to prepare for the arrival of the Makers. Ancient weapons were retrieved from forgotten vaults. Technologies that had been dismissed as theoretical impossibilities were hastily built and tested. Every species that had ever been saved by the Guardians contributed what they could to the effort. But even as the preparations continued, everyone knew the truth. They were preparing to fight beings who could reshape reality with a thought, entities that existed on a scale so vast that entire galaxies were merely tools in their cosmic workshop. The Makers' arrival was heralded by phenomena that defied description. Space folded in on itself, creating recursive loops where effects preceded causes. Stars aged billions of years in minutes, then reversed their evolution to become young again. Gravity flowed upward, time moved sideways, and the fundamental constants that governed physics became mere suggestions. Elena stood on the bridge of the second chance as the first Maker vessel appeared in the galaxy's central region. It wasn't a ship in any conventional sense, it was a crystalline structure the size of a solar system, containing geometries that hurt to look at directly. Its presence warped space-time around it, creating eddies and currents in the fabric of reality itself. All Guardian vessels, this is Kane, came the familiar voice over the comm. Remember, we're not trying to destroy them. That's probably impossible anyway. We're trying to communicate with them, to show them what we've built here is worth preserving. The Phantom's edge moved toward the Maker vessel, with the same calm determination Elena had witnessed 10 years earlier. But this time Kane wasn't alone. Behind him came the combined fleets of 47 species, united not in conquest but in the desperate hope that their unity might be enough to save everything they held dear. When the Makers spoke, their voice came not through communication systems but directly into the minds of every living being in the galaxy. It was the sound of creation itself, carrying within it the weight of eons and the power to unmake existence with a whisper. Small ones, the voice said, vast and patient as the movement of galaxies. You have built much in our absence, but you have also corrupted our design with violence, with hatred, with the petty jealousies that mark all thinking beings. The pattern must be cleansed. Kane's response came not through technology but through the same impossible means the Makers used, his consciousness somehow amplified, to reach across the galaxy. With respect, Kane said, his mental voice carrying all the quiet determination that had made him a legend. You're wrong. The galaxy held its breath as Kane continued. You see corruption and violence, but you're missing something important. Yes, we fight. Yes, we sometimes hate. But we also love, we sacrifice for each other, and we grow. The hegemony tried to create perfect order through oppression, and we stopped them. Not with superior technology or greater numbers, but with the simple refusal to accept that might makes right. Elena felt the Makers' attention shift, their vast consciousness focusing on the small human who dared to challenge their judgment. You would argue with your creators? The Maker voice asked, carrying a hint of what might have been amusement. I'm arguing with my judge, Kane replied, and I'm saying you're judging us by the wrong standard. You want perfection, but perfection is static. What we've built here isn't perfect, it's better. It's alive, it's growing, and it's capable of becoming something greater than the sum of its parts. Around the galaxy, Elena could feel the weight of the Makers' consideration. They were beings older than civilizations, entities that had shaped the fundamental forces of reality itself. But they had never encountered anything quite like the alliance that had formed in the wake of the hegemony's fall. Show us, the Makers said finally. What happened next was unlike anything in recorded history. Across 47 worlds, beings that had once been enemies worked together to demonstrate the unity they had achieved. Former hegemony soldiers stood alongside their former slaves, building hospitals and schools together. Children from a dozen species played games that combined elements from all their cultures. Scientists shared discoveries freely, advancing knowledge for the benefit of all. And at the center of it all, the Guardians continued their work, not as conquerors or rulers, but as servants of justice and protectors of the innocent. The Makers watched it all, their vast consciousness taking in every detail of the civilization that had grown in their absence. They saw the conflicts and the compromises, the failures and the triumphs, the messy, chaotic, beautiful complexity of life living freely. When they spoke again, their voice carried something that hadn't been there before, wonder. You have created something we did not expect, they said. Order born from chaos, unity forged in conflict, strength drawn from diversity. Perhaps there are forms of perfection we had not considered. Elena felt tears streaming down her face as she realized what was happening. The Makers weren't going to reset the galaxy. They were going to let it continue, to grow and evolve in ways their ancient minds had never imagined. Small ones, the Makers continued. You have taught us that creation is not a destination but a journey. We withdraw our judgment and offer instead our blessing. Grow, learn, love, fight when you must, but never stop becoming more than you were. The Maker vessel began to fade from normal space, T,